Well, is Canada's Supreme Court set to detonate a political earthquake? We're about to find out with our next guest. Ben Woodfinden joins us. He's a senior advisor with Meredith, Boessenkool, and Phillips, and he recently penned a piece in the National Post. It's called this: Dear Supreme Court, you don't have to do this. Leave Section 33 alone. That, of course, a reference to the notwithstanding clause and the case that was just before it, the Bill 21 arguments that were heard that we took so much attention to. Ben's on the line. Ben, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
So, make your case to our listeners here that Canada's Supreme Court should not think about touching the notwithstanding clause.
Well, there's a few things to be said on this. So the first, let's go back to when the Charter gets created and becomes part of the Constitution. So, we have very contentious negotiations over it. It takes a lot of time. Quebec, obviously, of course, never actually officially signed onto it. But part of the only reason we had a charter, this document that's supposed to protect rights in the first place, is because there were plenty of premiers, and not just conservative premiers. NDP premiers too, who recognized that giving the courts complete exclusive say over everything to do with rights and these kinds of things was one that kind of undermined our parliamentary tradition. But two, judges get things wrong sometimes, and you need some sort of recourse or mechanism to make sure legislatures have a role in that. So that's the history of how you get the notwithstanding clause. And then in the last 50 years or so, it's worked pretty well. Some people would disagree with that, but it's kept our system together. It's been used more frequently in some places than others, but you know what? The system is largely held up. I don't think anyone serious thinks, there is a place where rights aren't respected, but it also ensures that there is a role for democratic figures in having a say in these things. And what's being proposed here would completely blow up this system. It's honestly worked, I think, pretty well for the last few decades.
So, and of course, here in Quebec, just last week, we used it again, right? A new bill that was passed that bans certain types of public prayer in the streets. That is now law in Quebec as of last week, and the notwithstanding clause was used. Let me ask you, what made you write the piece? And I wonder if it's anything that you saw or heard from those 4 days at the Supreme Court, those 4 days of arguments.
Yeah, it honestly it was. So the case itself took the various hearings and the various things that were being heard took about 4 days. It was a long set of hearings. It was actually in terms of various interveners. This was different governments were getting involved, different civil kind of groups were getting involved, and it's the largest intervention, I think, in the Supreme Court's history in terms of the number of interveners they heard. But one thing that really, really bothered me was the federal government's actually made a submission as well, and in this submission they basically called for the Supreme Court to kind of massively to impose limits on the notwithstanding clause that don't exist in the text. It's sophistry, quite frankly, to try and invent these limits that are clearly not there and try and kind of like sort of judicial magic impose them. But the fact that the federal government is asking the Supreme Court to do this, I mean, just forget the political earthquake that would cause. It's also cowardly. We have an amending formula to the Constitution, and if governments don't like it, they can amend the Constitution. They can change how the notwithstanding clause works. But they want the courts to do their dirty work for them, and I think that quite frankly enrages me.
On the political earthquake front, and I've said it on this show, if the Supreme Court were to rule against Quebec here, and maybe even go further than many are thinking, just because we've seen examples of this court being rather activist in this front, I think it could blow up the country. I think it could just put all those people that have seen the separatism wane in the last couple of years because of Donald Trump. It could just be right back at the forefront after a ruling like this. Is that part of it here too? Like if you implode provinces' rights in this manner, could we see the Canadian Federation implode?
Yeah, I think Quebec especially. There's an election coming up in this year, and the timing of this decision is probably going to be some point. It will be before then. It's not sure exactly when, but it will most likely be before the election, and that could be a bomb to be detonated that would completely upend the kind of how that election goes. I mean, I think people can have their own opinions on things like Bill 21 and the kind of secularism laws I do, but ultimately, I think Quebec has a sense of itself and that its values and what it thinks is important as part of its culture. And the notwithstanding clause allows it to do these things. And if you take that away, or if you restrict that, you are basically giving separatists the biggest gift in the world, say, and kind of validating their arguments, right? That all these things that are important in Quebec, protecting Quebec's identity, actually you can't protect them anymore. And I don't think people have thought through that. Judges shouldn't be thinking about politics, but they shouldn't be blind to them either. And they shouldn't be, especially when they're being asked to do something that is, like I say, just invent limits that do not exist on the notwithstanding clause. This is not something that we should be talking about it, whether or not judges can be explicitly ruling on that kind of thing.
Ben, I'll direct our listeners to your piece. It's titled, Dear Supreme Court, You Don't Have to Do This, and it's on the National Post website. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
Ben Woodfinden is a senior advisor with Meredith, Boessenkool, and Phillips.
Canadian women are looking for more of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.